better future. What is that? What would you like to see in a better future, and how do we achieve that better future? Formalization is key. It's an interesting one. We've been grappling with this as a country for a very, very long time. How do we formalize the informal? I mean, I'm sure you know the numbers. 20% of us pay taxes. 20% of us pay taxes, which means that 20% of us are paying for what 100% of us utilize. That includes health, education, social welfare protection, and so forth. And of course, it just makes sense to try and broaden that envelope and formalize, because there's no doubt SMEs, MSMEs are always going to be the lifeblood of any economy. Go to any economy in the world. Sure, you have your big corporates, they're always there. But actually, who really runs the businesses at levels is SMEs and MSMEs. Doesn't matter where you go. So they're a vital cog in whatever we do in Zimbabwe and moving forward. Now, without further ado, let me call upon our two panelists who will join Philile on stage. I'd like to call upon Farai Mutambanegwe, founder and CEO, SME Association of Zimbabwe. Please give them a round of applause. And Mr. Kuda Matare, Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, ZNCC Regional Manager for Mashonaland. By the way, I have protocol. You have to keep clapping until they get here, ladies and gentlemen. It's a long walk. Right, so what we're going to do in this session is we'll give each of the other two panelists just a minute or two to introduce themselves and say some opening remarks, and then I will then move into asking them some deliberate questions. So, if you want to grab the microphone there, Farai. Farai, let me start with you. Just a 1-2 minute summation before I get into the questions, and then I'll come to you. Is it on? Yeah, go.
Thank you. All protocols observed. I think the issue of decent work and economic growth, those two things cannot be divorced. And what ties the two together, if you look at developed economies, why they actually manage to achieve decent work and economic growth is because of industrialization. And industrialization basically means that you are advancing your industries, primarily manufacturing, value addition, beneficiation, but also your services sectors and so on. And I think when we then look at our local context, our problem is informalization. In other words, we are now moving in the opposite direction to where we should be going. We are now, instead of us advancing, we're actually now moving backwards. We had complex industries, but now we're looking at our industries shutting down. We're moving back to the so-called malls and tuck shops. I'm sure we all know what those are. And obviously, those are not going to create or generate decent work because of the nature of the employment that they create. But I would also want to add that you cannot divorce decent work from skills, because you also need skills in order for you to actually create, higher paying jobs are associated with higher levels of skills. And unfortunately, again, if you look at our economy, at O level, we've got a 76% failure rate. I'm not going to talk about a pass rate, but I'm going to say we have a 76% failure rate. We only have 5 vocational training centers, right? Polytechs, I'm not too sure of the number, but there are few. What we have a lot of is universities. So we've got the 76% who fail at O level, those going to the informal sector. Those who pass, most of them going to universities and so on. No one wants to go to polytechnics. But at the end of the day, what skills are we producing? Are we able to actually then generate the high-value jobs? Even if we have the sophisticated industries, do we have the people to man them? So I think that will be my introduction with regards to the topic.
Thank you, Farai. Kuda, just a couple of minutes for you, just to introductory before I move into the questions.
Good afternoon, everybody, and may I observe all protocol. And thank you for this opportunity to come and share a few insights with colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, I think when you are speaking of SDGs and with specific reference to SDG number 8, as is explained by our very good presentation by our colleague from ILO. I think a better future is a universally accepted picture that has been painted through the SDGs. And I think that these can be achieved. It may look unachievable, but they can be achieved. And one of the things that we need to do is to look at the small little steps, practical steps that can be taken at individual level, at corporate level, and at policy level. And there are so many steps that can be taken from those perspectives. Because when we look at it from a grandiose point of view, where you are looking at big projects, it becomes almost insurmountable. I was very intrigued, colleagues, when Professor was making his presentation, because I had thought we were making progress towards SDGs. I thought we were making significant progress. But when he spoke about people living on less than 90 cents per day, then you think, okay, I may be making progress at a corporate level, taking care of my employees, providing social protection for my employees. But the majority, who are maybe more than 70% of the country, who are in the SMEs, who are in the informal sector, are not getting that opportunity. And you question some of the things that we are doing, and you get challenged. And I think that's where we would want to come in, Andy, and provide maybe a few practical steps. I think as we go, as we proceed, provide a few practical steps from an individual perspective, from a corporate perspective, and from a policy perspective.
Thank you. In fact, Kuda, let me then stick with you, and then I'll move to the other panelists. Kuda, let's talk about this. Now, economic growth, of course, should be a positive force for the whole planet. I think no one can dispute that. That's why we must make sure that financial progress creates decent and fulfilling jobs while not harming the environment. Because, of course, whatever we must do, as we said, profit, people, planet is critical. So, you said some practical ideas about business. So how is industry contributing to the fulfillment of decent work, or fulfillment of decent work economic growth under SDG 8?
All right. Thanks, Andy. I think there is a lot happening from an industry perspective, because when you're talking on industry, you're mostly talking from the formal perspective. And I think she has highlighted quite well how the level of social protection that is being provided in the formal sector, but lacking in the informal sector. As the industry, I think we've been privileged enough to work, for example, with the ILO through MCOS, where they have provided guidance to the corporate sector on how to achieve the SDG number 8, and how to treat workers, how to promote workers' freedoms, and so on and so forth. Those are some of the steps that have been taking place. And we have seen workshops being hosted through various platforms where this information has been passed on. And we have had experts from countries like Sweden who have come to Zimbabwe to provide expertise on how you can improve on decent work. But again, Andy, it's a question. It's a game of numbers. We are faced with a situation where we have a growing informalization. We are saying she said something very interesting, and I was questioning myself and say we are saying let's formalize, let's improve on our levels of formalization, but in actual fact we are informalizing. At least in Zimbabwe, we are informalizing with over 70% across Africa relying on informal sector. And I think that's where the question is, to say how do we then tap into that as corporate sector? How do we tap into that and assist and help through various programs? And we have seen a variety of programs from various corporates who are trying to reach out into the community and made some improvements from there. But these are mostly disjointed community projects, or maybe not disjointed, but individual community projects, which need to be summed up and see what level of impact are we making at that level.
Thank you. You know, one thing it's interesting to talk about is what is referred to as unpaid work. Now, most of that is women, gender issues, because they're the ones who go and get the water, get the firewood, while the men are technically working. Now, that's unpaid. And interestingly enough, I think I saw a survey once that unpaid work actually contributes to government's budget, because they don't have to budget for a lot of these things that normally they would. In other words, they're letting the citizens, through these traditional means of creating water and putting a lot on gender, actually they're using that to cover some of their budget shortfalls. I'm sure if you do later on can talk about that as well. Farai, let me come to you. Talking about the same sort of question that I asked Kuda. Look at the numbers. 11% of the world's population, that's 783 million people, lived below the poverty threshold in 2013. Most of the poor and developing countries are not employed or do not earn enough to lift themselves out of poverty. I think Philile talked about that. Work to be poor, I think, was one of the expressions. So, Farai, 80% of our economy is informal. We know that number, and it isn't moving. In fact, as you intimated yourself, it's getting worse as the policies are creating informalization rather than creating formalization. So, in that vein, how do you see formal SMEs contributing to the attainment of SDG 8?
Thanks, Andy. I think if you look at developing or developed economies, the sector that actually drives growth is what we call the growth-oriented enterprises. So growth-oriented enterprises are not informal sector. These are businesses that are started typically by professionals, people who've worked before or we have some experience. They set up their businesses, they are formalized, and they're growing those businesses. And growing businesses are the ones that create jobs. If you look at most economies, the large corporates or the businesses that have already grown, they don't create jobs. They actually shed jobs because they start to automate and so on. So for Zimbabwe, the issue lies in, number one, we have to correct the policy environment so that formalization works. And I think we are all familiar with this. If you go to the tuck shops, if something is said to be $2 and the exchange rate is 40, 1:40, if it's $2, it's 80 zik. You know that. But when I walk into Pick and Pay, which is a formal business, the exchange rate is pegged at 28.9. But the product, when I calculate, the effective exchange rate is probably 45. And then I have to do some maths to say, okay, do I use ZIG, do I use US dollars, and so on and so forth. So in short, what I'm trying to say is that our formal environment complicates things, which is why people are resorting to informality. And what we need to do is we need to obviously iron out these issues. They've been spoken about, the currency issues, the corruption, and so on. We need growth-oriented enterprises. Those are the ones that are going to create jobs. Personally, I don't subscribe to formalization as an agenda. I think because these people that are in the informal sector, normally in a functional economy, they would be working within businesses created by growth-oriented enterprises. So they would contribute to the tax net through PAYE, through employment taxes where they go to shop. They're doing that in formal businesses. Because all of us, we don't like going to the tax shops. We want to shop in Pick and Pay, but we go there because the environment forces us. So once you actually create a conducive environment, automatically people move out of the informal sector, they move into jobs, they become part of the tax net, the economy grows, we achieve decent work.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. I went into one of these formal supermarkets and they worked it out in ZIG and they said it's 10 US. I think it came to 250, okay? That's 10 US dollars, okay? So I looked at the guy and I was like, give me a second. So I then left the shop. I went outside. I changed it. I got 500. I walked back in. I paid them 250, which meant going onto the street to change my dollars meant it only cost me 250 zig, $5. Whereas in the shop, it would have cost me 10 US dollars. Can you see? This is the arbitrage we're talking about. Farai, let's continue on this thought, because obviously we now have, because of informalization, we have an unbanked economy. We have people who won't bank their proceeds because they're not sure if the tax man will come along. And also they can't bank their proceeds because there's KYC issues at banks and financial institutions. And so how do you think, what do you think, is it possible to attain, you heard what Julia said about formalization, how hard it would be to attain decent work and economic growth with such a huge informal sector. So do you believe that decent work can be achieved with such a huge informal sector which isn't contributing? And if so, how do you think we can change that narrative?
Yes, certainly we will not achieve a decent work with an informal sector, and we will not achieve decent work if we do not address the issues. I think I've already alluded to the issue of growth-oriented enterprises, the issue of more advanced jobs, the issue of better skills, because we cannot divorce. If you don't have the skills, then obviously the decent work also cannot arise. But I think, obviously we need to iron out the policy environment. We need to encourage formalization. If you look at the banks, if you look at why people are not banking, it's not because they don't trust the banks. It's because of the charges. It's because when I put my money in there, automatically the banks start deducting charges. When I try to buy, they're taking money. Government is also coming in, they're doing the same. If you look at what happened just before the election in May, I think May last year, when the finance, because before that people were not using bank accounts, especially US dollar nostro. The finance minister came in, he took out the 15% surrender that was there on local nostro. People started banking. A lot of people opened nostro accounts, and then what happened? The next budget, they put back the 2% IMTT, and now people are not banking again. So these things, they are predictable. We know exactly what the problems are. It's not that people don't trust banks, but it's that people already don't have a lot of money. But those charges then just make it impractical. And so people keep cash rather than using the formal channels.
That speaks to integrated policies, which is what we're talking about. How do we integrate our fiscal, macro, as well as labor issues, social welfare policies, that they all talk as one? Kuda, let's go on the same theme, because of course, how can formal industry, which you represent to the ZNCC, how can you hope to give decent work and economic growth when actually you're not competing against the economy? You're competing against the informal sector, where suddenly you can't keep up with the wages, because the more the informal sector grows, the less profits you make, the less you can pay and give decent work to your employees. It's like a vicious circle. So how do you think, what strategies you think industry can put in place to effectively try and compete with the informal sector, or at least work with it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, Andy. I think that's the reality. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. The thing that they are already doing, because for them to be where they are now, in such a difficult environment, there has been something that they've been doing, regardless of the policy environment that we are in. So one of the things that I would just encourage the formal sector to continue to do is continuous improvement of standards of productivity and efficiency. And I believe that this will improve their competitiveness, not only locally, but also regionally. So that's one thing that I think they can do. Also to be adaptable. That is to increase and their product and market dynamism in line with the changes that we are seeing in consumer tastes and preferences and the technologies that are coming through. The other thing that I also think can be done is to tap into the knowledge, into the expertise of local industry in terms of policy making, companies and businesses need to contribute towards policy making, policy lobbying and advocacy. I know I have a colleague who used to say it's frustrating to deal with government because government is 3 speeds, which is stop, very slow, and nothing at all. But I think what we need to do is to continue engaging government because I believe that there is progress that can be made in the policy making. Yes, it's frustrating, but there is progress that can be made. The other thing, Andy, that I would want to urge, I know you asked me from a business perspective what can be done, which I've just tried to do in summary or in short. But also, I think from a policy perspective, I think there are certain things that we can do as both government and business. We have a local content policy. How do we implement the local content policy? Because that is what will also help boost the local production and local productivity. Yes, there are other things at play that needs to be considered, but I think it's one of the things that can be done. Local procurement by both government and business, so that we can boost our local economy. Those are some of the things that I think can be done.
I think that's a good point, because if you think about it, the informal sector are selling us products that if we made them, we wouldn't need them to sell us, which means that things would shift to the formal if we could produce those products here rather than importing and buying from the informal sector. Philile, just to wrap up, you've heard some of the comments. I thought let me give you a chance before I open up the floor to Q&A, just to wrap up as you started the session.
Okay, thank you. I think I wanted to focus on the K economy, something that is very important, because I think women always get the short end of the stick and they bear the brunt of the informal economy. If you look at the percentage of those who are in the formal economy, it's the women. Now, the women are expected to run families. The unpaid care worker is speaking to. So as ILO, we're now looking to see how can they be remunerated. The K economy, how can we make sure that these women are still able to participate in the formal economy without having to choose between taking care of their kids, the elderly, the disabled. So we're saying we need to allow them to have access to some of these services, and they must be affordable. So I can able to leave my child and be able to also integrate in the formal economy. I'll give an example. We have a safe market that we've been working with, well, not with. We actually contributed to establishing a safe market in Chesvingo. I don't know how to but it's called Chesvingo, right? Yes. So what we did there, we have a market where the women are able to sell their wares, and then we have an early child development place where you can send your children while you're busy with your wares. And then you also have a one-stop where if you're having issues GBV, we are able to go there for some therapy. But my point is, I think the K economy is such a huge economy that is stifling the progress of women and their integration into the formal economy. So mine is to say we really need to look at these gender issues as well within the formal sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I heard an interesting story. It was about this unpaid care and women going to collect water. As they would do every morning, they'd go collect water to bring back to the household. So these women in a certain area in Zimbabwe had to walk 10 kilometers to the borehole to get water. So a CSO decided that, what would be easier is let's build a borehole right here next to the village. So the women don't have to walk 10 kilometers. They can just walk over there, get water, and bring it back home. So after about a month or so, they noticed that there was nobody going to the borehole 2 meters away from their village. No one. No, the women were still walking 10 kilometers to go and get water. So they decided they were going to get the women together and ask them. And the women said, look, In the morning, this is the only time that we can go we can walk 10 kilometers. We don't have to be home. We can chat. We can gossip. We can do everything. Yeah. And then come straight home. Now you want us to go 2 minutes and come back to the husband. I said, no, thank you. So it just shows you that what you may think is a solution may actually not be one. And I think that's very important. Right then, let's open up the floor to questions. Our panelists are here representing the SMEs, formal business, the ZNCC, and of course the ILO. We can open up the floor to a few questions looking at decent work and economic growth. Patrick, may I ask you to, there we go. We'll start with you, Prof, and then, yeah, please.
So, thank you very much, Ms. Masuku. So, I wanted to just remind ourselves of the statistics. One, that informal sector contributes 64% of GDP in Zimbabwe. We were, but I'm sure now second to Bolivia in the world in terms of informal sector, and it employs more than 80%. My question is, yes, we are moving towards the formalization, but I heard other reputable institutions say, why don't we have a two-tier where, yes, we move towards the formalization, but also to improve productivity, while it's still in the informal sector. Informal sector, yes, more than 50 years or whatever. So can that be formalized in 1 decade? No. So the issue is, can we think also of making productivity improve in the informal sector? Last year as a researcher, most of the informal sector, they are saying we want to pay tax, but the question is, what do we benefit? There are no toilets, there's nothing we are getting, so why do we pay tax? That's the opposite.
Thank you. There's another question there, sir. If you could. Thank you. If you could just as well introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Ngorima Langton. The professor just stole the thunder from my stone. But really, I echo the same sentiments that there's an assumption that the informal sector is informal by default, yet in actual fact it is by design. There are benefits that they derive from being informal. So our formalization strategy, I think, in my view, should be a whole of society approach, where we also make sure that business understands that there are benefits for creating space and linkages with the informal sector, and for the informal sector itself to be conscientized to understand that they have a responsibility. You can't just operate a business and not fail to contribute something to society. If we get that whole of society approach, I think it will work very well. Let me come to my sister from the IO. You mentioned one of the pillars of decent work. By the way, I'm a subscriber to decent work. Issues of social protection. When you talk of issues of social protection, you then have to look at it from a life cycle approach. That you provide social protection from the womb to the tomb. But what we have seen in Zimbabwe is that the last segment of social protection, that is the post-labor market era, has not really been looked at significantly. And I'm saying this because I'm aware the Public Service Commission, in the big employer in Zimbabwe, will be hosting a retirement conference end of November. So we just want to get insights from you to say, what really can we do to improve the retirement context in Zimbabwe to ensure that we don't leave the retirees behind as we journey towards the 2030 vision? Thank you.
I think that's a very good question. And of course, decent work really does contribute to what we're trying to achieve today, of trying to come up with strategies of long-term savings culture for a better future. Right, do you have any more questions before I get the panelists to answer? Okay, great. Farai, I think the first question you can do with that, yeah? Productivity, and I'm sure Kuda can also jump in as well there.
Thank you. I think for me, the danger is in structuralizing informality. The danger is in accepting informality as a norm. Because the moment we start talking about these things, about, the economy is 64% informal sector and so on, and then we make it like the informal sector is significant, it's important, and so on. What we fail to see is that what has happened is that the formal sector has collapsed. The reason why the informal is becoming significant is because the formal has collapsed. If we actually had a functional formal sector, your informal would be a very small percentage. And in fact, most of the people, I think there were surveys done, 85% of people who are in the informal sector would rather be informal employment. They would rather be working at a job, but they are out there because they can't get jobs. So the solution to me is not in increasing productivity in the informal sector. The solution is to make the formal sector attractive, make growth-oriented enterprises thrive, make formal businesses thrive. You need a level playing field. You need formal sectors to compete on the same playing field as the informal. And what you will then see is that the informal will shrink, and what you will get is an increasing formal sector. That's how we get our GDP going up. That's how we get to upper middle income. We will not get to upper middle income with an informal economy, no matter what we try.
Something about how we make things normal. I'll just give you an example. Let's assume that right at this moment, the power went. Okay? Do you know what would happen? We'd just continue, wouldn't we? Not a single person in this room would be saying, the power's gone. We'll just continue. Because why? Because they're used to the power going. We're making things normal that shouldn't be normal. In fact, I would even put my microphone down and continue talking in darkness, and none of you would bat an eyelid. That gives you an idea how we make things normal. Let's have your comments on that.
Okay. I think one of the key things that we have to look at is productivity, competitiveness, and viability. And I think those are key components of driving the growth of the formal sector. And I think if we address productivity, viability at corporate level with the various initiatives of the things that are within your control, you can make a certain degree of progress. But at the same time, we also have to look at what are the external factors that are affecting productivity and viability of the formal businesses, and make sure that we put some of our energies towards that. And this comes back to the issue of promoting local competitiveness. How do you really improve on ensuring that we are making things local? We are, when I spoke about local content policy, and one of the things that I just wanted to highlight there was what it spells out is that for selected products that we believe we have competitive advantage in, we are then reserving that for local production, for input into our local manufacturing services and so on and so forth. And I think that is what will drive up the formal sector. And the other thing that I would also want to touch on is how do you then reduce the reliance on commodities? Because the vulnerability of relying on commodities is too big. I think we as a country, we have been celebrating how gold has gone up in prices, but on the flip side of it, look at some of the commodities that we are producing in the agriculture and the mining sector, and how they are going out as raw. I know it's a cliche, that is, it has become a cliche to talk about it, but those are the realities. And as long as we continue to do that, it will be difficult to transform ourselves as a nation and build industries that are sustainable.
Thank you very much indeed. Philile, you heard the final question, and if you have any comment.
Thank you. I just want to maybe touch on some of the points made. I thought maybe I should clarify that people in the informal sector are not necessarily unskilled people. We've got skilled people who are in the informal sector. So that means they're not contributing to the tax base. And this is what we're arguing to say. If you have 20% in the formal sector bearing the burden of the 80% that is some way, not declaring their words. So these people need incentives as well to come into the formal sector. And the point that I've been making about being in the informal sector, I said this is a process and it's very complex. And if we can't bring everybody to formalize, which we probably cannot, then we need to figure out how do we extend the social protection to those? How do we scale them? How do we train them? So that they're still able to benefit. Because also the disadvantage of some of the disadvantages of being in the informal sector, we have issues of occupational safety and health. We have illegal work in the informal sector. So what happens to that sector? Those decent work deficits that I've been speaking to. So I think that there's many aspects to it. I think it's not a black and white situation. There's many dimensions to it. And I think we need to address each component according to the circumstances and how we can meet those challenges. Now, when it comes to Mr. Mborima's question, I think, first of all, government does have a responsibility for their employees when it comes to retirement packages. I think when you start contributing the day you are employed, I think we need to see how we can capacitate them when they're into retirement, whether it's reskilling or maybe helping them see how they can package their retirement and make sure that they're able to benefit from it. So as I know, I think one of the things that we do try to get into that space of capacitating those who are retired. How can you spend your money? How can you invest your money? But I'll also leave that to Old Mutual. That's also a challenge for Old Mutual to see how they can assist those who are retired. Because, when you look at the retirement age, I always feel like it's just too low. How can you retire at 60? 60 is so you still have the energy. You can still pursue other avenues using your retirement. And I think Old Mutual may have different packages for that. So I'll leave that part to them as well. Thank you.
You're 100% correct. Definitely Old Mutual is the organization that can come up with some solutions. But it is an issue, isn't it? The fact you get to 60, 65, and possibly your pension may not be enough. You may not even have one in place. But I think what is even more worrying is that you can't possibly save when you're living hand to mouth. And I think 90% of people in this country, citizens, are living hand to mouth. Then you're saying, save, have a savings culture. So there are some of the underlying issues that you're talking about now in the SDG 8 that we need to work on and put forward solutions for, so we can build up that long-term savings culture. We can build up the pensions and life insurance industry, because 87% of all policies in this country are, guess, burial policies, funeral policies. 87% of everything written in this country, because I tell you now, every Zimbabwean has a funeral policy. Every Zimbabwe. But when you go to them and say, do you have a life insurance policy? Do you have a pension policy? It's down to less than 1% of all policies written are life insurance and life insurance policies. I think Sam can verify those numbers because they know them better than I. Right, I can give you 30 seconds just to sum up if you like. Let's start with you, Farai, and then Kuda, and then we'll finish with Philile. Just 30 seconds just to sum up.
Thank you. I think to sum up, I think what we obviously need to correct the policy environment, the macroeconomy, in order for us to stimulate growth-oriented enterprises, which can then create the decent work and the economic growth that we are looking for under SDG 8. Thank you.
Yeah, I think in summary, I can just say that the environment you are in determines the kind of progress that you can make. And I think the better we create a better environment for our businesses, I think the better it is for the future of our country and for future generations. We need to work on policy. We need to work on corporate entrepreneurship. we need to work on ourselves as individuals and not just look at government, but also do a lot to hold government to account for some of the policies that they are putting in place.
I like that. Let's not forget about innovation, entrepreneurship, particularly amongst our young. What are they now? I think 70% are under the age of 35, if I'm not mistaken, so that's definitely a key. Final word, man.
Thank you. I think you've also taken the words out of my mouth. I'll speak more specifically to social dialogue, the importance of social dialogue. Because if government and the workers and the businesses are speaking to each other, then we're able to move together and we agree on the policies, and we know that then we're all taken care of. I think that would be my last word, to say let's strengthen social dialogue as workers, as employers, as government. And then that way we're able to move together in tandem and make the right policies that will benefit the whole of Zimbabwe. Thank you.